Jalen Hurts is not a top 5 NFL quarterback, and that's actually a good thing.
The Eagles' pass rate last year, 43.7%. Dead last in the NFL, not even close. That is the lowest rate for any team throughout a full season since 2009.
And before you say, well, Jalen can flat out run, yeah, that's part of who he is as a quarterback, but dead freaking last? How can we have a quarterback be in the top 5 when he's not asked to do nearly as much as some of the other quarterbacks in the league? I don't think it's a stretch to say Jalen was surrounded by the best supporting cast offensively, maybe ever. When you take a look at position by position, these dudes were freaking monsters. And honestly, it really showed up when 2 of their best players weren't available early in the season. Well, that just happened to coincide with Jalen Hurts' 2 worst games of the year. So let's talk about the New Orleans and Tampa Bay road games back-to-back away from that nasty home field advantage at the Lynx. So you saw that Jalen's lowest QBR was versus the Saints, and his second lowest PFF grade was versus Tampa Bay. And if you take a look at the box scores, they don't look too bad, but he was careless with the football, multiple turnovers, multiple fumbles, one of which was lost. And this was the Tampa Bay box score where it was just ugly all around. So let's hit the tape to see what happened. And you'll see on this play right here, Jalen could have made something happen in my mind, but you see not having both of them on the field really hurt the Eagles, okay? So the first thing here is the Eagles are in like a trips bunch right here on 4th and 3. This is somewhat common, especially if you're thinking they're going to play man-to-man. These are really good man-beater formations in my mind. Okay, so Jalen starts off looking at the top of the screen, and where I think a mistake happened was right here. Okay, the guy that had been cooking in this game is Dallas Goedert, and as many of you know, he ended up winning the game for the Eagles a little bit later. I believe that Jahan Dotson, this should have been a mandatory outside release, an MOR, if you will. And what that means is we want, no matter what, for our receiver to go to the outside. And normally mandatory outside releases are good when you're trying to run deep overs to this spot of the field. So I think A.J. Brown would have outside released here. Once again, I don't know the plays. You guys please correct me if I'm wrong on that. But you see, Jahan Dotson falls, all right? And this really creates a jumbled mess, right? You see Goddard is open right here. Would he have been open if you would have outside released? Remember, if you go outside the corner, the safety also gets pulled over the top. You just threw a pick over the middle to Tyrann Mathieu earlier in the game. So there you go. Still, I think Jalen had a shot to get out of this and make a play. Well, why couldn't he have made this play right here? Because it did look like there was a rushing lane. Well, you'll see that the right tackle who's in for Lane Johnson is a guy by the name of Fred Johnson, and that is probably the most basic name of all time, Fred Johnson. Come on. You'll see he basically gets dominated on this play. So basically, if A.J. Brown and Lane Johnson, who would be on the opposite end of the spectrum, they would be doing a spectacular job. It was hard for Jalen to overcome these 2 players not being on the field. So you'll see Fred Johnson gets pretty much mollywopped right into the lap. If not, Jalen would have been able to step up, maybe make something on a scramble drill. Maybe he beats Demario Davis in a foot race to the first down marker. I don't know. Maybe he's able to step up and see Goddard. But you see how much of a mess this offense became when those 2 weren't on the field. It is 3rd and Chesterbrook here. The Eagles are down by 21. So the defense is playing their worst game of the season, but the offense isn't doing that much better. Jalen is 1 for 5 before this throw right here, and you'll see on the field there is no A.J. Brown, no Devonta Smith, and no Lane Johnson, okay? So right here, if I'm Jalen, I know that I have 2 downs to pick this up. You're down by 21. You need points. Your defense isn't playing well. And look, you start off with the route, okay? A.J. Brown is never getting punked this badly. But Jahan Dotson's not that good at football, and he gets absolutely pressed out of this world. But eventually he does disengage, and he does eventually get a step on this corner, and watch what happens. Jalen, I think, had an opportunity to at least give Jahan Dotson a chance to make a catch. Instead, he sails this way out of bounds. Why did he sail it well out of bounds? Well, Jalen is used to having perfect pass protection on the right side, and the Buccaneers decide to run a twist. All right, Lane Johnson is probably picking this twist up better than Fred Johnson does. Fred sees that the twist is coming late. The communication for Becton right here probably could have been better, but you'll see Fred Johnson, you can see his head is still on the end. He's getting hit by Vita Vea, and he's just too late to react to it. It's a very difficult block. Lane Johnson has made it 1,000 times. So, in Jalen's defense, he's used to this being perfectly clean. But QB could step up and still make a better throw here to give Dotson a chance, who has a step here. All right? Another thing Jalen could have done is maybe step up and actually run here. All right, they are so far back into their drops here. Maybe he can hit Saquon right here, and Saquon's probably picking this first down up. But it does look like there was a potential rush lane right here. Mailata's got his guy in a phone booth. But still, Jalen could have done more here in my mind. All right, it's not the worst, but it's also not the absolute best, and Jalen would go on, as many would in this situation, to not having a good game versus the Bucs. Tampa and New Orleans just happen to be the only two games where they scored fewer than 20 points on the season, and you see that they had a very nice bye week come at a very good time because they got A.J. Brown and Lane Johnson on the field essentially for every game the rest of the way. Now, you do see a little bit of Jalen's value here. The only game that they lost was with Kenny Pickett stepping in for a hurt Jalen Hurts. But you see how much more explosive this offense was when those two were in the game. You take a look at Jalen's PFF grades, that 51.3, you don't really have anything as bad as that the rest of the freaking way. You can kind of sort of see the same with QBR, which is a little weirder for me on a week-to-week basis, but you see the grades weren't as bad as they were versus the Saints and the Buccaneers outside for a few games. And you really see A.J. Brown's true value when the first touchdown was scored after the bye versus the Cleveland Browns. Okay, so this touchdown is a perfect way to describe this entire video. Now, there is important context here. Saquon Barkley, this was the only game where he was held to under 50 yards rushing. So this was the only time outside of Kansas City where he was really stopped throughout the entire season. All right? So you need other people to step up. 0 points midway through the second quarter. So the Eagles had been having some slow starts up to this point. Let's start with Lane Johnson. Here he is one-on-one versus Myles Garrett. That is never a great proposition. And like you just saw a minute ago with Vita Vea, you have an inside move. So Lane Johnson does get a little help right here from Becton. But does Fred Johnson here get beat? Maybe so by Myles Garrett on this inside move. And guess what? Myles Garrett probably versus Fred Johnson would be in the lap of Jalen Hurts affecting this throw. But because the Eagles are at full health basically on this offensive line, they're able to protect this, okay? Now, we get to the actual route. You get Devonta Smith back. Over here, you get A.J. Brown back. Remember, you just saw Jahan Dotson get eaten alive in press man, all right? That's not going to happen with A.J. Brown. This DB knows to not try and do that because A.J.'s going to just slam you into the underworld, all right? So A.J. just throws him off of him on this 3rd and 7, and watch what actually happens here on this slot fade. Jalen Hurts actually puts too much air under it. While this isn't the worst throw, this isn't the absolute best, but watch what A.J. Brown does. I am not sure. And once again, Jerry Rice is obviously the best I've ever seen at this. But when it comes to balls in the air, there is nobody I have seen in the NFL better at adjusting to balls in the air than A.J. Brown. And he truly is a Torrey Hunter, or I should say Denzel Burke, level center fielder when it comes to, timing everything. So watch. He slows down and gets in front of this DB, and you'll see from another angle what he does here is genius. Look at how his big frame just kind of stacks this DB, and he's able to make a very difficult grab. Now, this doesn't look too difficult, so you'll see that A.J. Brown is having to redirect. Now, we have this going in super slow motion. Some of that is because of copyright reasons. I can't have this channel get taken down because I have to feed my dog. But take a look at this. I mean, this truly is spectacular tackle football. So the DB actually gets his hand into A.J. Brown's chest. But one thing he does a really good job of is putting his hands up basically at the last second. Jamar Chase is probably the best at this in the NFL. Okay, if you put your hands up too quickly, the DB will be able to get this hand probably more over here and deflect this. But because he waited practically until the last second to get his hands up, he's able to catch it without the DB getting his hand in there. And you'll see the hand is still in there, and he's trying to swipe it, but the sheer strength of A.J. Brown, this is a 4-point play. This is a difference between a field goal and a touchdown. He's able to bring this all the way in. Football really is a game of inches, right? And Lane Johnson just holding off Myles Garrett just a little bit, and A.J. Brown holding off that DB just a little bit, was a bit of difference in this game.
Sports discourse is strictly about emotion. Championship or not, people are going to elevate who they like, downplay who they dislike.
I've seen every Jalen top 5 outrage over Chris Simms' rankings, but the truth is, the top 5 is the top 5. I think the top 4 are pretty much set in stone, and I got to go with my guy Jaden at number 5 based on what he did just last year. Now, if you want to talk about a full career, of course, Jalen Hurts clears a lot of these guys on this list, but, I mean, we're talking about the best quarterbacks, not who's had the most accolades. And I think it's actually a good thing that Jalen's not a top 5 quarterback because most of the Super Bowls are won by the elites of the elites, right? So you're telling me I could pay my quarterback a really nice salary, which the Eagles have done, and still surround him with elite talent while also not having the absolute best head coach and still dominantly beat a dynasty in the Super Bowl? Sign me up for that. That is very encouraging for the rest of the NFL. So let me know what you guys think down below. I know the comment section is going to be very civil. And bang, this is where I think Jalen is actually the best, arguably, in the NFL. It's his mind. Check it out for yourself. It is Power Hour NFL. Boom. And tonight, we're doing steaks.